The western Chinese province of Xinjiang proved to be located close enough to the major Islamic cultural center of Samarkand that it was common for prophets and religious scholars to travel there and spread the word of Islam, establishing a strong Islamic tradition with the Uyghur people who lived there. One of the most influential of these religious scholars was named Afach Koja, whose followers named themselves the Afachi Koja and officially organized following his death. The beginning of Emperor Daoguang's reign would see efforts to bring Xinjiang closer into the Chinese cultural sphere, something that the Afachi Koja would resist, and they led an open rebellion, even capturing other Qing territory before its leaders were captured and subjected to Lingqi in 1828, although small instances of resistance would continue on for the next 50 years. Meanwhile, at the southern port of Guangzhou, the Qing had many luxury resources the Europeans desired, such as silk, porcelain, and tea. The Chinese refused to trade these items for anything but silver and showed no interest in industrially made European goods. Most officials in Daoguang's administration chose to learn nothing about the world outside the Qing borders and reasoned foreign products must be of inferior quality. The British, who were very eager to continue to buy the Chinese luxuries, especially tea, began to worry that they would run out of silver due to the lopsided trading balance with the Qing, so they devised a plan to reverse this imbalance. The wealthiest Hong of all from this trade relationship was Hao Qua, who made his fortune selling porcelain. In 1822, a fire of unknown origin broke out in the 13 factories and ravaged the entire neighborhood. Onlookers reported seeing rivers of molten silver pouring out of Haoqua's factory into the Pearl River. This incident would have a lasting impact on Haoqua and encouraged him to begin lending money to other Hongs and foreign firms in order to mitigate the risks of having his fortune all in one place. The interest Haoqua earned on his lendings made him the richest man in the world at the time, with the largest portion of his money going to America to finance the burgeoning railroad industry, with his connections playing a large part in the use of Chinese labor in its construction. It became evident to the British merchants of the East India Company that the use of opium as a recreational drug was common among the Qing elite, and they reasoned that if they could increase production, they could begin to sell the drug to the common Chinese people. They planted massive poppy farms in the territory of Bengal and turned around and shipped the drug to close by Guangzhou. As predicted, opium exploded in popularity in China, and the East India Company was joined by other enterprising merchants, including Scotsman William Jardine and James Matheson, who would go on to found one of the best known Anglo companies in Hong Kong, the partnership Jardine Matheson. The company still exists today with revenues in excess of $109 billion, with its headquarters, the Jardine House Tower, showing prominently on the Hong Kong skyline. Somewhat ominously, their logo today is a poppy flower, which pays homage to their roots in the opium trade. Many began to suggest the emperor tax the drug, but he refused and instead demanded the total ban of the opium trade. In 1839, British traders were forced to hand over 2.4 million pounds of confiscated opium, which was then destroyed on a public beach. The opium, which was mixed with tobacco and then smoked, brought the empire to its knees since the drug was so widespread, cheap, and quick to effect. Millions of people became effective zombies, so Dao Guang was right to call it a scourge and demanded the temporary blockade of the Pearl River to get the illegal drug trade under control. At this time, opium was by far the most profitable good traded by the British East India Company and accounted for roughly 50% of their revenue. Therefore, they were determined to keep the market open and declared war on the Qing in 1840 by attacking their blockade. The British and their vastly superior steamships easily outgunned the Qing's obsolete fleet of junk boats, resulting in 45 Chinese soldiers dying for every one British. Within 2 years, the Qing were forced to surrender and sign the Treaty of Nanking, the first of the so-called unequal treaties, which stipulated that the Chinese now had to pay the British a tribute and were forced to open up for increased trade, in addition to handing over the island of Hong Kong to the British. The signing of the Treaty of Nanking is widely considered the official start of the century of humiliation. Emperor Dao Guang would pass away in 1850, being followed by his son Xian Fang. In the years leading up to Xian Fang's ascension, a young man named named Hong Shuquan, was growing up in Guangdong with aspirations of joining the Qing administration. He came from a middle-class family, so they could afford to pay for him to study and take the imperial exam, but if he were to fail, they could not afford to keep paying the fees to allow him to continually retake it. Hong Shuquan was an intelligent person and good student, but the imperial exam was incredibly difficult, and with a pass rate of less than 1%, it was not surprising when he failed. He would return home and take a job as a school teacher, continually studying and attempting to pass the exam. Although he would take it two more times, he would fail at each subsequent attempt. After several times of not passing the exam, Hong Shuquan suffered a mental breakdown and refused to get out of his bed for a week, to the point his family didn't know if he was dying or not. During this period of isolation, he would have a very vivid dream that would change his life. He dreamt that he was in a city of clouds where he met a very large man who told him that he was angry with the humans for worshiping false idols, and the man told Hong Shuquan it was up to him to rid Earth of its evil. When he awoke from the dream, he wasn't quite sure what to make of it and put it on the back burner. Hong Shuquan would attempt to take the imperial exam one more time, but failed again. Feeling dejected as he walked out of the examination room, he would encounter a Protestant missionary who was handing out free Bibles and scripture passages. Although this type of evangelism was now banned in China, Guangdong at the time was filled with bandits, gangs, and pirates, and the Green Standard Army, who was in charge of policing, had bigger priorities. Hong Shuquan had never heard about any of the teachings of Christianity and would take the pamphlets home, and later when he sat down and read them, came to the realization that the fatherly man he saw in his dream must have been God, and that Hong Shuquan was his son, which meant he was the brother of Jesus Christ. Hong Xiuquan would begin to travel around southern China and spread the word that he was Jesus' brother, and his closest follower, Yang Shuqing, would go on to start the God Worshipping Society, an evangelist Christian group which combined Protestant and folk teachings. By 1850, the group had over 10,000 members united around the idea that China must be rid of the sins of Confucianism and Buddhism, and Hong Xiuquan began to order his followers to destroy Confucian and Buddhist monuments and to burn any related books. The God Worshipping Society was able to drastically increase its member base in southern China by operating a militia, which would fight the numerous criminals and their organized crime organizations known as triads, gaining popularity amongst the local peasants. In 1851, as his influence swelled, Huang Shuquan declared himself the heavenly king of the new Taiping heavenly kingdom, and his armed followers began a rebellion to overthrow the Qing and conquer China under a unified Christian kingdom. By 1853, the followers of the God Worshipping Society were ready to proclaim their kingdom, and with a large rebel force, stormed and took the important city of Nanjing. Hong Xiuquan told his people to burn alive any ethnic Manchus living in Nanjing who he claimed were demons, resulting in the genocide of 40,000 people. After this initial success, the Taiping rebels appealed to Western Christian powers, expecting them to come to their aid to help evangelize China. But to their surprise, most Western nations chose to remain neutral since they did not understand Hong Xiuquan's intentions, and many saw him as a heretic. Yang Shuqing began to question whether Hong Xiuquan was really the Messiah, and in 1856 attempted to launch a coup known as the Tianjin Incident. The coup was ultimately unsuccessful, but led to a major weakening of the rebellion, with 27,000 members of the opposition being murdered. At this point, the British were becoming annoyed that the level of trade revenue coming out of China had not substantially increased following the First Opium War, partly due to the entrance of American competitors who were now sourcing poppies from the Ottomans to undercut the British, leading to the price of the drugs to fall, allowing the addiction of the Chinese population to continue. Therefore, relationships with the Western powers were rocky at this point, and many began to view the Christian missionaries that they had previously tolerated with suspicion. After several instances of missionaries being killed, the British used this as a pretense to attack the Chinese, beginning the Second Opium War. They allied with the Americans, French, and Russians by sending a large naval fleet to attack and siege Beijing. By 1858, they had pressured the Qing to surrender and sign the Treaty of Tientsin, which would force the Chinese to allow Western nations to establish embassies in Beijing, as well as the free travel of Westerners throughout the empire. Both things the Qing had refused to allow previously. Emperor Xianfang was humiliated by the treaty and decided not to accept it, turning to his Mongol neighbors to the north for military assistance, meaning the fighting resumed the following year. A number of invading soldiers were captured in Beijing and imprisoned in the imperial palace, and then they were subsequently tortured by having ropes tied around their limbs to stop circulation until the flesh died and maggots formed, and they were finally killed by having dirt and animal dung shoved down their throats until they suffocated and died. In 1860, at the Battle of 8 Mile Bridge, British and French forces together charged Use my sneeze. In 1860, at the Battle of the 8 Mile Bridge, British and French forces together charged a major bridge leading into Beijing and faced the collective Qing and Mongol army, who were sadly no match for the Western guns. Emperor Xianfang fled Beijing to resort in the mountains north of the city known as Changde. When the Westerners arrived at the imperial palace, they discovered the tortured bodies of their comrades and considered burning down the forbidden city as retribution. Believing that the destruction of such a beautiful building complex would be regrettable, the troops marched on to the old summer palace, burning it to the ground as revenge. The Qing were forced to surrender, this time for real, and attended the Convention of Peking, where they were also made to sign a third unequal treaty known as the Treaty of Aigun, which ceded much of the territory of Manchuria to the Russians, allowing them to found the warm water port city of Vladivostok. Xianfang would die from poor health at Chengdi, being followed by his young son Tongzi in 1861. Since Tongzi was only 6 at the time of his ascension, he was placed in a co-regency with his mother, Empress Dowager Cixi, and his late father's other wife, Empress Xian, who ruled together as despots. The British were motivated to keep the existing Qing government in place so that their possessions obtained under the Treaty of Nanking could remain in place, and they offered seasoned British Army officer Charles George Gordon to lead a small force of elite Chinese soldiers known as the Ever Victorious Army. By 1864, the Ever Victorious Army was able to retake lost territory and blockaded Nanjing, which was the last Taiping rebel stronghold. Running out of food, the rebels had to resort to eating wild plants. One of these plants was fatally poisonous, and when Hong Xiuquan unknowingly ate it, he died, ending any resolve for the rebels to keep fighting, and they shortly surrendered. A smaller rebellion known as the Nyan Rebellion, which was occurring contemporaneously with the Taiping Rebellion, was also crushed this year, with the rebellion being fueled by famine and regional practices of the killing of female infants due to limited food supply, leading to a large surplus of males, and consequently many men who had no hope for a wife and family. Brutal tactics by the Qing to suppress revolts in the western, predominantly Muslim provinces, leading to the Panthay Rebellion of the Hui people, who were responding to instances of ethnic cleansing. Counterviolence by the ethnic Han minority created an opportunity for the Turkic Uyghurs to establish a short lived nation called Kashgaria, based around the captured city of Kashgar in Xinjiang, and who were supported by the British and Ottomans in what was known as the Hui Minorities War. Emperor Tongzi ordered the beginning of a new initiative known as a self-strengthening movement, where he would attempt to restore some of Qing China's lost prestige by adopting Western military tactics and weaponry technologies, leading to the defeat of the Panthay Rebellion in 1873. At the age of 18, Emperor Tongzi died from smallpox without a male heir, and was instead followed by Empress Dowager Cixi's nephew Guangxu in 1875. By 1877, the Hui Minorities War was won, but it resulted in the deaths of 21 million citizens, with the province of Xinjiang losing 73% of its population to ensuing ethnic cleansing of the Hui at the hands of the Manchu Qing. The reforms of the military saw much less success against foreign Western powers, and in 1884, the Qing went to war with France over their suzerainty over Vietnam, beginning the Sino-French War. Within a year, the Qing were defeated in the war, being forced to sign the unequal Treaty of Tianjin, relinquishing Chinese influence over Vietnam, allowing it to become a territory of the French. The Qing's reforms of the military paled in comparison to the efforts that the Japanese had been making, transforming themselves from a feudal society to an industrialized one in only a few decades. The leaders of the Japanese Empire began to worry about Korea, which was still a backwater territory falling under the influence of China. The Japanese worried that if no real control was exerted over Korea, organized crime would continue to flourish there, limiting trade, or worse, would allow the ascending Russian Empire to come fill the void. Further, the rapid industrialization colonization of Japan meant that they had to rely on importing food products, with Korea being one of their major suppliers due to their proximity. Lackluster harvests as a result of drought on the peninsula served as an impetus for the Japanese to invade Korea in 1894, with the Qing coming to their defense, beginning the First Sino-Japanese War. The technological mismatch between the Chinese military with that of the modernized Japanese one was a disaster for the Chinese, and they were forced to sign the unequal treaty of Shimonoseki with Japan in 1895, relinquishing suzerainty over Korea and ceding the Qing territories of Taiwan and the Liaodong Peninsula in northeastern China, although the European powers of Russia, Germany, and France, who all had interests in the Far East, would form the Triple Intervention and force Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula to China to limit Japanese influence in the region. Nevertheless, at this point, Japan passed China to become the preeminent power in East Asia. That same year, Emperor Guangxu's rule over the western provinces was tested when a group of Uyghurs who had been radicalized by the teachings of Arab Wahhabism rebelled in the Dungan Revolt, although this time the Qing were able to defeat the rebels along with aid from loyalist Muslims. Banditry and widespread crime was still a major issue for China, and with the eradication of the Taiping rebels, a new organization of peasants known as the Big Sword Society began to fill the void of policing. In 1897, a German Catholic missionary named George Stentz was accused of raping a local Chinese woman, and the Big Sword Society sent a group of vigilantes to his residence to stab him to death to obtain justice. When they broke into the house in the middle of the night, they could not find Stentz, so they instead resorted to stabbing two Catholic missionaries who were staying there, killing them both in what became known as the Juye incident. In response, the German Imperial Navy arrived with several large steam gunboats and demanded concessions from the Qing or face invasion. The Germans had been invited to the Triple Intervention, a sign of their rising global power, but lacked any territory to trade from on mainland China. They received the Shandong Peninsula on the Jiaozhou Bay, which they renamed the Kiautschou Bay Leased Territory. Its territorial capital was established at Tsingtao and served as the headquarters of the German Imperial Navy's new East Asia Squadron.